Hey Waffle Gang, I do hope you're well. My name is Mark and today we're checking out some more Reddit stories, and if you do love a Reddit story, why not consider hitting that like, subscribe, maybe that notification bell too. Let's crack on with today's first story. Much love guys. Now today's first story comes from the MaliciousScompliance subreddit from ACFF, who says, CEO didn't understand what my department did apparently. Some backstory. I was a general troubleshooter for my company. My job involved a lot of traveling to different clients we support. My area of work is Ontario, don't get on me about the pronunciation, Canada, where I'm based out of, and some of the nearby states in the United States, New York, Massachusetts, Vermont, Pennsylvania. I did most of my traveling by car since my schedule can change quite quickly, and flying can become very expensive. I had one colleague who is technically my subordinate, but we have a very good working relationship and would often handle calls independently of each other, only checking in by phone once a week and in person once a month / when necessary. A little over a year ago, I get an email calling me to the head office in New York City for a meeting with a CEO and the board of directors regarding my job. I checked with my colleague and he got the same email. So we make our travel plans and meet in New York City the following week. We have dinner together the night before our meeting and can't figure out between us what the issue is about. It's rare to get summoned to head office and more rare for things to be so vague. When we go into the meeting the next day, we're informed that the company is dividing our department between the US and Canada, and that there would be a new person to deal with the US clients and we were to restrict ourselves to Canada. Both my colleague and I were a little shocked at this, since neither of us had even heard this was being discussed. I asked who the new person for the US was, and we then learned that it was a new hire that the CEO had taken a special interest in. Trying to be of good spirit, I offered to train the new person. There are many realities of the job that are not in the job description. CEO accepted and then brought in the new hire. In walks a young lady who looks about 23 years old and wears an expression that she knows everything. She sits at the table and immediately makes it very clear that she wants nothing to do with us. CEO is Bob, new hire is Karen, my colleague is Jim. The CEO, Bob, says, "Welcome Karen, we've just informed OP and Jim about the change in structure and they're willing to give you the support you need to get yourself started." Karen and Bob both look at me. I said, "Glad to have you aboard, Karen. I think both Jim and I have a lot of experience to share with you, and we're happy to do so. Perhaps it would be better in a separate meeting so we don't take the board's time." Karen replied saying, "Thank you all. I have a lot of ideas of how I can streamline our department and new policies I can introduce that should save the company a lot of money and expenses." I'm very confused at this point. Karen is speaking as though she is my supervisor, and that is distinctly not what Bob spoke to us about. I can see some of the board members giving strange looks at this as well. I said, "Bob, perhaps I misunderstood the new roles here. Would you please clarify?" Bob says, "Sure. Karen is the new head of your department, and both you and Jim will answer directly to her." A board member says, "That isn't what we discussed or approved as a board. We weren't fully convinced of dividing the department, but this is completely against what we discussed." Karen said, "What did you discuss then?" The board member says that your department would be divided between the US and Canada. OP and Jim would remain north of the border and you would run the US. Karen says, "That's not what I was told, but I can work with that, as long as these two stay out of my way," indicating me and Jim. Jim and I are both shocked and insulted to be spoken to in this manner. We are both very good at our jobs and before today have never seen this woman in our lives. Bob, the CEO, says, "That settles it, OP. Effective immediately, you and Jim have nothing to do with Karen. Do not interfere with her work at all. You are both to restrict yourselves to working within Canada only." With that, he ended the meeting and left the room with Karen close behind him. Jim and I sat there stunned for a moment, and some of the board members came up to us to express their shock and sympathies about this. I had enough presence of mind to ask if we get a written directive of this change and was assured we would. Sure enough, both Jim and I got emails with a new directive from Bob by the end of the day. So after sending an email to all of our US-based clients, advising them of the change and giving them the contact information of Karen, Jim and I made our way back to Toronto and reorganized ourselves for working with Ontario only. This meant much less traveling for us, so it gave us more room to breathe. Within a week, I was getting complaints from our US-based clients that Karen was not answering emails and missing appointments. I forwarded these emails to Karen and copied the entire board, including Bob. Another week later, I get a phone call from Karen who sounds frantic, but will not admit she needs help. She makes pleasant conversation and then asks how I would handle a particular type of situation. I tell her I'm not really interested in discussing work as that might be seen as interfering in her work. Later that evening, I get a call from Jim telling me he had the same conversation with Karen and handled it the same way. By the end of that month, I get a call from Bob asking if I will take over the entire department again. I politely tell him no, since I didn't want to interfere with Karen and her role. For the next 3 months, I'm getting emails and phone calls from US clients asking if they can have me back as their contact. This confirms an idea that has been in my head. Jim and I had actually grown our client base in Ontario, since restricting ourselves here. So I had lunch with Jim one day and asked him if he wanted to go into business with me as partners starting our own consulting firm. We couldn't provide everything our current company provided, but we could provide a high degree of professionalism for our specific field, and it seemed we had a ready-made client base. By the end of lunch, he was on board and we started the necessary steps to get ourselves set up. As soon as we were clear, we both submitted our resignations with explanations of why. The next time clients contacted us, we told them we no longer worked for the company. When they asked if we still worked in the field, we told them we had established our own firm and what services we offered. A month later, we had 60% of our US clients on board, and since the former company had no Canadian support at all, we had 80% of the Canadian clients. Within 2 months, we had 80% of the US and 90% of the Canadian clients. In the years since that time, our company has grown enough that we've hired 7 new consultants. Jim and I find ourselves doing more office work than road work, and a lot of client courting. Our old company has had to stop offering the in-person troubleshooting, what our department did, and Bob was fired by the board. No idea what happened to Karen. OP added some updates with some answering some questions. They said, because of interest expressed in the comments, I made a phone call to one of the board members I remained on friendly terms with. Here are some answers to some questions. How did Karen get the job? Apparently Bob had set up a business school scholarship out of his own money, which had put something like 6 or 7 students through business school. Karen was the latest graduate and Bob wanted to give her a start in the business world. Was Bob sleeping with Karen? No clear answer was given, but Bob's wife divorced him shortly after he was fired from the company. Make of that what you will. What happened to Karen? Apparently she got a job as middle management in a financial services company. Hopefully she can build a life for herself and had learned some important lessons. What happened to Bob? Last I heard, he was a regional director for a large hotel chain. Hopefully he also lands on his feet. Everyone deserves a chance to make a life for themselves. Some questioned why the board was there for this meeting. I honestly don't know, and neither did the board member I spoke with. It was one of their regular scheduled meetings and Bob added things to the agenda. Some questioned my use of non-compete, saying it's not nice. It's a normal reality in the business world. The oddity is that my old company did not have one. The non-compete I have my employees sign is not overly burdensome. It protects our intellectual property and professional contacts. It does not in any way restrict the employee's ability to work in the field. That said, Jim and I both agree that if an employee leaves us on good terms and reasonably asks to be released from the non-compete, we would oblige. Some inquired if we are still hiring. Unfortunately, we are not. We are taking a pause from expansion right now, as Jim's wife is dealing with cancer. I don't want Jim to worry about the office while taking care of his wife, so we decided to maintain our size, which I can do with minimal input from Jim, until his wife is in remission and has a chance to rest and return his attention more fully to our company. Jim and I treat each other like family, so this is a natural step for us. Thank you all so much for your interest and great feedback and discussion in the comments. I'm not sure if you're going to get this reference, but in the UK, I know they did a US version. I don't think it's too well received, but in the UK they did a show called Peep Show, and there's this guy in it called Alan Johnson, who's this business guy, sort of like very arrogant type person. I love his character. He cracks me up. But at some point in the series, he goes off the rails and basically tries to get the main character to join his consultancy business. And he explains how it's going to work. And he explains it like, go in, change the logo, fire a certain percent of the business, boom, consulting. It's just like, what the fuck? And that's all I could picture as I was reading this. I know it's not really relevant to the story at all, but it did tickle me. What do you guys make of this situation? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. And let's move on to another story. Now, our next story is another malicious compliance story that says, you want me to delete my own account in front of you? Okay, done. A bit of background first. 15 years ago, I worked at a gas station as an opener. Because I was young and somewhat tech savvy, I was also the de facto IT for the 3 stores near me and had been heavily involved in setting up a new point of sale POS system for their 2 most successful stores when they were swapped from one gas brand to another. The company had made me the super admin on all registers just for ease of transition. Remember this later. The owner's wife had been awful to me for the 2 years that I worked there. I got bumped to opener by her husband and she hated to have a man be an opener. Historically, every single opener was picked by her and was a woman. But her husband came and fired the previous opener for theft while the 2 of us were swapping shifts. So I got a field promotion of sorts. The wife was constantly scrutinizing everything that I did, constantly calling me in the mornings to be rude and berate me for a bunch of minor things I did wrong. You used wet wipes on the area around the drink machine. I want you to use paper towels and spray. We were out of paper towels and the spray we had smelled like a hospital anyway. I came in your store last night and there were 3 rows of Snapple apple. You could probably increase sales by putting 1 or 2 of those rows to a different product. Even though the Snapple fridge was 100% handled by the vendor, and we signed a contract that we wouldn't change the layout of product, etc, etc. Long story short, she was awful to me because I was a dude. I'd set up their point of sale system because I was somewhat tech savvy. I was made super admin on the new registers they had. I was desperately looking for work when I found a temp IT job, which led to my current career in IT. I got a new job offer and gave her husband 2 weeks notice, but never told her because I did my very best to avoid talking to her unless necessary. When she found out it was Tuesday of my last week and she legitimately lost her mind, gave me a ton of stuff to do and worked me to the bone until 2 p.m. on the last Friday I worked. Finally, the time to depart forever came, and she personally came with an office worker and stood by me and asked me to delete my account from the register. I knew I was a super admin, and I had been told if I ever left to convert the account. She'd been told this but had long forgotten it. So I said to hell with it and complied, then went to the other store and did likewise while she watched. I go about my life, start my new job and end up about 3 weeks in when I get a frantic voicemail and like 20 texts and calls from her. I called the office worker who had stood over my shoulder with her and got the scoop. She basically couldn't change any prices at all when new beer and soda prices started rolling out, and a new opener had just let it all pile up because she didn't know how to do it, and they were going to have someone come train her. They had a bunch of items 5 or 10% below the price they were supposed to be at. Margins on cases of beer are low, and this was nuking their profits. Once I thought it was over, I texted her and said, "You asked me to do this, it's on video, and we have 3 witnesses. The person she had me training, the person I swapped with, and the office worker who had quit in the 2 weeks since." Click. Edit. I didn't hang up on her, I'm just being funny. I found out later that they ended up spending $6,000 to get the company back out to fix the issue. The boss's wife legit had a Facebook page at one point with people planning to shit on her grave when she died one day. Edit for clarity, she's still alive, so I wasn't the only person she was awful to, but I do feel like I got one up on her, and it feels good. Edit. I want to thank everyone for making me laugh with your fun comments. My slow Friday afternoon has been much more fun sharing stories about this terrible job with everyone in the comments. Added a few small notes for clarity in the body of the post. Gee bloody whiz, you gotta wonder how awful someone's got to be to have a Facebook page dedicated to how bad they are. That's gotta be rough, right? However, I would have loved to be listening in on that frantic phone call when she realized, well, fuck, we've just deleted the super admin. Anyway, what do you guys make of this situation? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. And let's move on to another story. This next story comes from Consistent Shoe 9602 and says, boss yells at me for following instructions and tells me to do the opposite next time, which backfires. About 20 years ago, I used to work as an office assistant at a small company where we would receive orders from clients, and then we would assign the work to one of our freelancers who were well compensated and respectable professionals. My boss was such a professional herself, and when possible, we would assign that work to her. I accepted the minimum wage job because she told me I could sometimes get tasks assigned as a freelancer with a nice freelancer compensation, that she would personally train me, and that in less than a year, I would most likely be promoted to a regular freelance and make very good money. This sounded like a great career path to my young and naive ears. One of the things she had told me in the very beginning was that when you take over an order, you become like a project manager for that order. You need to make sure that the freelancer would finish the work on time, as the work was usually time sensitive. Additionally, she loved going on long lectures about how she is paying me, minimum wage, for me to use my brain and figure things out when necessary. These lectures were mainly a vehicle for her to stroke her own ego by explaining to her employees how our brains were not as smart as hers. One day, our biggest corporate client had placed a large order that was due on Monday by noon, and we had assigned the task to my boss to do over the weekend. It was Monday morning, time was ticking, and my boss hadn't arrived at the office. The client had called to see if we're going to provide the work soon, as it was urgent. I tried calling my boss, who didn't pick up her mobile. I called half an hour later and texted her. No answer or reply, while noon was fast approaching. So I called her landline at home. Her husband picked up, told me she wasn't home, and I explained very briefly why I was trying to get a hold of her. Less than an hour before noon, my boss called furious that I'd been so insistent on getting hold of her and that I had created a state of stress and emergency at her house. Her home number was for emergencies only, and this wasn't an emergency. It's not professional to call people when they're not at work. She told me she got everything under control, and she was now sending the work to the client directly. When she arrived at the office, she gave me a big scolding in person and told me that I do need to hound the other freelancers, but not her. It was her business, and she got everything handled. She knew all the clients, and they were clients because of her. She looked at me in the eye and told me, if I take over a task, it's not your task anymore. It's my task. You don't need to bother me with reminders. You just give me the instructions from the client and I'll handle everything myself. From that point on, your job is done. I never ever miss deadlines. If the client calls, you tell them I'm on it, and you don't call me or text me about it. Fair enough. I apologized for the stress and repeated the new instructions back to her for confirmation. She was very happy with that and confirmed I had understood everything. She once more gave me a favorite lecture about how she is paying me, minimum wage, for me to use my brain, with a lot of condescending examples of how she always uses her brain, unlike us normal workers. I could only nod along as if her narcissistic rant was actually teaching anybody anything. About a month or so later, another client came in with an order. I accepted it. My boss was available to handle it, so I forwarded everything to her and considered my work in regard to that order done as instructed. On the day of the deadline, I was on vacation and was hiking in a remote area with spotty cell coverage. The other office assistant called me and told me that the client had called the office to check if the work was ready. I told my colleague that our boss was on it and that we didn't need to worry as our boss was going to handle it, and that my clear instructions was to tell the client our boss was personally on it. The task would be done by deadline, and explicitly not to call our boss to remind her of the deadline. Then, since I was on vacation, I needed to conserve my battery, and everything at the office was handled. I switched off my phone. An approaching deadline that my boss had to meet was explicitly not an emergency. Also, I had recently realized that my boss had knowingly misled me about the career opportunities this job was affording me, so I wasn't going to be on call on my rare day off. While I was hiking without a care in the world, my boss had managed to forget about the deadline. By the time she realized she had missed it, the office was closed. My boss had urgently finished the work, but it turned out she didn't know the client so well, as she didn't have their contact details. As the order was in the office and my phone was off, she had to go there herself, fetched, and used the contact details to deliver the work late. This was particularly embarrassing as my colleague had informed the client our boss was personally doing the work for them. When I came back to work, it was pandemonium. She screamed at me, but I simply pointed out that everything I had done was following her instructions. Why did you do this? You told me to. Why didn't you do that? You told me not to. She was fuming, but she knew I was correct and I had acted exactly as instructed. She also screamed at me for my phone being off, but I said I needed to conserve my battery for emergencies, and this was clearly not an emergency. And I'm not on call while on vacation anyway. Malicious compliance for the win, right? Well, narcissists never accept blame, and she had an idea of how to shift the blame to me after all. But you didn't provide me with the client's contact details with the order assignment. How could I have delivered them the work? It was your fault for not providing me with all the information. I pointed out that she told me she knew all the clients personally. But if she had used her brain like she's constantly telling us to, she could have easily noticed that their order instructions were on the client's letterhead with all their contact details spelled out. On every single page. Bottom and top. Now that was a huge slap to her fragile ego, and remembering her face in that moment still makes me smile. Needless to say, I was fired. Of course, I didn't mind. Don't you just love happy endings? God, just sounds like an awful person to work for. But what do you guys make of this situation? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Now, just a huge thank you for being here today, getting involved in the stories, your love, your support, your time. It always means the absolute world to me. So thank you so much for being involved. Truly, it's absolutely amazing. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care and much love.
Wake up, get up, stretch my legs, eat some breakfast, milk and eggs, brush my teeth up, wash my face, throw my